Hello everyone, welcome back to Dr. Novis. It's really amazing how far modern society and medicine has come. Take this tiny over-the-counter pain medication, for example. For most people, you just pop it and go about your day, right? But you see, what about in the times before the health industry became so regulated? Today on Dr. Novis, we're talking about two things that weren't a good idea, but people did anyway. Before we get to the story today, everyone, welcome to Dr. Novis. Do you enjoy the strange, mysterious, and unexplained? Well, Dr. Novis is the channel for you. That's all we do here on this channel, at least one video a week. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you jump scare that like button, but while it's on the ground crying, offer it your red starburst so it stops. As well, make sure you subscribe and hit that tiny bell so you never miss a video. April 1962, Allendorf, Germany. A young woman was born by the name of Gunhild Kramer, but something had gone horribly wrong. The doctors, you see, thought the baby only had hours, if days, to live. The parents then would call a pastor to have the baby baptized in an emergency situation, not knowing how long that their daughter had. You see, Gunhild was born extremely malformed. Her arms were incredibly short. She had 4 fingers on each hand, some of which were webbed together, and her rectum had somehow been located on her left hip. Strangely enough, the next month, a few hundred miles to the west in the city of Cologne, Gisela Weinhardt would give birth to her daughter, Claudia Weinhardt. However, she would look to the doctor, seeing a concerned look on their face after just giving birth to her baby. When she asked what was wrong, none of them replied. Like Gunhild, Claudia as well had been born with extremely short, malformed eyes and a horribly misshapen spine. Unbeknownst to these children's mothers at the time, but their 2 daughters would be 2 of almost 10,000 reported babies at the time with these birth defects. These babies would come to be known in this time as flapper babies. In actuality, these children had been exposed in the womb to a drug called thalidomide and are now referred to as thalidomide babies.
Yes, thalidomide, the wonder drug. Trouble sleeping at night, common cold got you down, upset stomach, or perhaps those morning sickness pains got you down. Well, baby, do I have something for you. Cure all these sicknesses and more with thalidomide. Don't you know it's as harmless as a sugar cookie, hun?
You see, despite being marketed for pregnant mothers and claims of being safe for pregnancy, thalidomide was anything but. It was in fact not tested at all on pregnant women and was rolled out across Germany and then later across Europe and other parts of North America throughout the 1950s and onward. Wherever this drug went, children born with birth defects and many children that died would follow. Generally, this was centralized around Germany, as this was where the pharmaceutical company that created thalidomide was founded. You see, Gunhild and Claudia were truly some of the lucky few that would actually be able to survive and then go on to live relatively normal lives as thalidomide babies. After many surgeries and months of grueling rehabilitation, Gunhild would eventually return to her parents in her small village in which she lived. She would become the first disabled student actually to attend school at her local schoolhouse in her town, her local janitor even fashioning a special desk for her body, as Gunhild's arms were still extremely short, but she was able to function as normally as she could, even being able to ride a bike and do several other things that normal kids her age could do. As she grew older, she would begin to struggle with trying to cope with the strangeness and the changingness of her body as a young adult, but also as a person with disabilities in the life and system that we live in. Her arms would never grow to be normal length. There was just many things that Gunhild could not do. Yet, despite that, she still persevered, eventually becoming a black belt in jiu-jitsu. She would go to school and university, eventually working in a civil registry office for 23 years. There, she would eventually meet her husband, having a perfectly normal, healthy child, and now she is retired, working on a book about her life as a thalidomide survivor, trying to raise awareness for those that are disabled. Like Gunhild, Claudia would endure months of rehabilitation and surgeries as a young child to get to where her body could function without the use of prosthetics, as she was forced to wear a plastic corset to correct her spine, as well as use large prosthetics to make up for her short arms. She would return, going to a school for disabled children in Cologne, eventually heading to the regular student school where she would thrive, eventually heading off to university. These two women would prove to be many of the lucky ones, as other thalidomide babies would die very, very young shortly after birth, or would grow to have more severe mental or physical deficiencies to where it was not possible for them to live a normal life if they did manage to live past their young adolescence. In 1968, the pharmaceutical company would be taken to court over these thalidomide allegations, as it had spread now across much of the world, and it was becoming quite the crisis. However, as these things go, the company would eventually be found not guilty. They would, though, in a settlement, create a grant and a fund which provided a stipend for thalidomide survivors, but ultimately this just really isn't enough, especially when you look at the amount of money that was actually given to many of these people. It would take until 2013 for high-ranking members of this company to eventually come out with a public apology to thalidomide survivors, apologizing for the fact that they had ignored it for so long, as well as acknowledging all of the wrongs that they had done. Yes, this company is in fact still in business. The one positive, I guess, that we can take from this is that ultimately the thalidomide crisis resulted in much of the modern day health and regulation system that we see today across the world, whether it's the FDA in America or whatever you have in your respective country. I would say this is a remarkable improvement compared to pills that claim to be as harmless as a sugar cookie. For those of you who are interested in this subject, there's a cool documentary that was made about it by Nico von Gossot called Nobody's Perfect, which details the lives of 12 thalidomide survivors. Oh yeah, did I mention that Nico himself is in fact one of these survivors? For our second story, I need you all to cast your minds back to the 1900s, the streets of New York. The streets are bustling, people are everywhere. It's a great time of innovation and excitement. You hear the chatter of citygoers as you walk down the street, the laughter of children, when all of a sudden you hear ringing through it all the cry of a baby. You stop. However, you look up, realizing that the sound has come from above you. Above you, you see shocked, well, this. This, my friends, is a baby cage, or how they were originally sold as a health cage. And they were all of the rage throughout the UK and parts of upper middle class society in the US throughout the 1900s all the way through the 1960s even. I mean, just look at this thing. What kind of a sick parent would lock their kids inside of this thing and hang them out their window above a busy street? Looking at you, Eleanor Roosevelt. Yeah, really, I'm not joking. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote in her autobiography that when she was a young woman living with her daughter in New York, she would place her daughter Anna in an ox wire cage-like box that sat in her window. You see, these health cages, as they were named by their inventor, Mrs. Crafty, were intended to provide young babies with sunlight and fresh air, particularly in areas of populated cities where they couldn't otherwise access it. In theory, this wasn't the worst idea to ever be had in human history. You see, at the time, a disease known as tuberculosis, TB, which attacks the lungs, was spreading across the world and had claimed well over 1 million lives throughout our history at this point. Many doctors felt at the time to combat this disease, fresh air and sunshine was needed for those of all ages, but especially young children. You see, the baby cage, the health cage was inspired by these things called open air schools, which were thought to help open air combat the spread of tuberculosis and were popular in England. Cyanide Philinide, I gotta hand it to the inventor, as these cages would become extremely popular, especially in heavily populated parts of Europe where there are no public gardens, specifically in London, throughout the 1900s. As we said, mothers found them very helpful and often necessary in areas where they had no access to gardens for their children. Organizations such as the Chelsea Baby Club would even hand these out to members of their community, believing them to be extremely helpful and needed for these large, tightly knit packs areas of London where there is no public gardens. In 1935, the British Institute for Royal Architecture even declared that these baby cages were a necessity in upper middle class society homes. However, many were not convinced and felt that these cages had some pressing safety concerns. Again, Mrs. Roosevelt recalls a time in New York with her daughter upon moving there and her neighbors being extremely upset about her baby cage and the safety of her child. This next part genuinely shocked me. Somehow, throughout all my research, I cannot find any confirmed reported deaths from these baby cages. They would be continued to use over various points of popularity throughout the 1900s into the 1960s. Like we said before, a large majority of this popularity came in London and certain heavily populated areas of England, but it was used as well in the US, eventually until it kind of died off. We're really not sure what exactly killed off the baby cages as a concept, probably largely due to the fact to changing views on child safety and laws around child safety throughout the world. But however, there's still some people to this day who swear by them. Personally, I'd probably attribute it to the rise of cars, especially in America and heavily populated areas. You probably wouldn't want your kids sitting out over the city, out your Manhattan penthouse, eating up all those fumes from car exhaust. Personally, I thank my mother for not dangling me off a balcony in a cage over a large city street. That was it for our stories today. Let me know what you thought of these strange things that people thought were a good idea, but definitely weren't in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, why don't you like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to share the video with your friends or someone who you think might find it interesting. And as always, guys, stay safe out there. It's a spooky world.